On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Brajesh Jha. He is the SVP and Global Business Leader of Data Tech and AI at Genpact. We're going to be talking about what a Gen AI at scale means. I think people are still figuring things out, but we're also still trying to think about this thing as a bigger solution. But, where do you start? Do you chase the storm? Do you wait for things to settle before you tackle it? A lot of questions still within these last 18 to 24 months that we're still trying to figure out. And Brajesh, thanks for being on to help talk about some of these.
It's a pleasure. I'm glad to be here, Amir.
Awesome. Out of curiosity, before we start, can you tell us what Genpact does?
So Genpact is a global professional services firm. We spun out of GE almost 2 decades ago, and today we work with some of the top Fortune 500 companies. We help modernize and transform their operations, and we run them the most efficiently. And as we do so, we become the trusted advisor of companies in taking over, whether it is specific functions such as finance and accounting or technology operations. But in a nutshell, that's essentially what we do.
So obviously we're talking about, on this episode, about Gen AI and really figuring out what scale means. And I actually think it's a great topic because there's just so much conversation around the subject. And I think we're all a little bit at a point where we've heard enough about Gen AI that we start thinking that we figured out a lot of things. I don't know if we really have. I guess at a high level, let's talk about what Gen AI at scale even would look like. Do you have a definition, or do you have a vision of what that actually means?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it is a vision that is formed out of my own personal experience and that of what I have seen in the context of working closely with clients as part of my tenure here at Genpact. If I see the way industry has evolved over the last 3 decades of my own corporate experience, I saw what the initial wave of computerization did. When we first began working in the industry, people were skeptical about whether computers will take over the work that human beings are doing. I still remember in early 90s, I would talk to the software developers that were asked to write code to automate the work that is done by engineering draftsmen who had to do manual drawings for large construction equipments, things like that. And when they heard that we had software that could produce engineering drawings, they said, "Oh my God, we are not going to have a job anymore." And then fast forward many years later, when I came to Genpact, I started seeing a similar trend when robotic process automation came and started automating a whole bunch of processes. And there was a general fear across the board that, oh my God, maybe all of the back office work that people do, even middle office work, much of that can just be automated and these bots will just take over. And now I'm seeing similarly with Gen AI, now the entire hype is about the fact that this is going after knowledge work. It is going to just completely change what human beings are supposed to do because it can pretty much do anything that human beings can do. So I think there's always a sense of hype that comes when a new innovation arrives first, and the extreme possibilities are first what people think of. And those extreme possibilities are the ones that generate the corresponding reaction. When in reality, what actually happens is that a lot of the innovation is always gradual in nature. It is incremental. It makes an impact, certainly, but the horizon is where people generally fail, and they're not able to predict how long or what shape in which that change is going to happen.
Absolutely. And of note, you kind of mentioned, and we've actually can talk about some of the previous trends we've seen. We saw the metaverse a couple of years ago, blockchain, crypto. I think there are always emerging. I mean, obviously, cloud is one that everyone either has adopted or very close to. We're still seeing still to this day, some migrations to the cloud. And it's not easy because functioning businesses have a lot of moving parts. And if it's not broken, don't fix it until the point in which there's some gain in efficiency. Then a business does move into that. We're seeing with Gen AI conversations of the excitement, how amazing that's going to be. And oh, for sure, this is a part of our plan. Is there any understanding yet? And how far is the understanding of, you know what? There's some kind of dotted line from, hey, we do not have any Gen AI capabilities to why I'm going to have it. And that dotted line seems to be either, I don't think it's going to be short or easy, but again, I mean, obviously depends company to company.
Absolutely. If you think about it, I was just delivering a talk where I was quoting what happened last week. We all saw the announcement of Apple Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And the initial reaction from people would have been, hey, Apple seems to be the only one that is not doing much about AI. There are others who are way ahead, and that there's not what's going on. And then comes this announcement, and you hear of Apple Intelligence, and your initial reaction is, okay, well, so what? What's the big deal? When in reality, if you think harder, what you realize is that they are going to take advantage of the hordes of personal data that they have amassed or they are capable of amassing about personal behaviors, about personal locations that you travel or memories that you create on the back of your personal choices. They can now radically transform the experience, our day to day real life experience. Why? Because generative AI actually made it possible to create new kinds of experiences. Now, to take advantage of those capabilities, you need to understand the context. And when it comes to a B2C scenario, the context is best understood by companies that get inside your head. The social media companies obviously have a lot of information about individuals, but this one single device that is with us since morning till evening, it has way more information than any other device or ecosystem that you can think of. And therefore, when they announced Apple Intelligence, the underlying message, and I would highly recommend listening to Professor Scott Galloway's stories, how he is a lot more brutal and much more direct. I am taking a more softer view of it. But the reality of it is that Apple is deliberately choosing a slower movement towards capitalizing on the data because they first wanted to see, is this real or not?
Mm-hmm.
If you think from a B2B context, in B2B scenarios, there is not a single entity. You can't say that there is one single company's product that has all of the information about organizational moving parts, the parts that you talked about, the people, the choices that are made, the various divisions, the geographies in which operations are running. All of that data is sitting in various different places. Some of that data is produced at a very high velocity. Some of that data is providing all kinds of variety. Some of that data is extremely high in volume. Others are lower in volume. But all of that data is relevant to what makes that organization an actual living entity. And in that living entity, if you want to get the guts of that entity to power some kind of an LLM to get actual insights into what that organization is about, you have to have a handle on all of that data. And that is why, when it comes to deploying GenAI at scale in the context of a single business entity, the biggest and greatest challenge that people run into, they can have lots of small use cases, but what they don't have is one single unified approach towards tapping into the organizational data ecosystem. And that is the greatest challenge, because of which the entire promise of Gen AI at scale is yet to be realized in complete fashion. We are still sort of early in that journey. We've only built the tools. What Gen AI and others have done is just the tools. But by using those tools, the kind of transformation that is likely to happen, much of that is yet to be seen. And that, I believe, is the greatest positive movement forward that will happen when human beings discover new kinds of experiences, new kinds of business outcomes that organizations can provide on the back of this innovation.
You mentioned something about waiting for the storm to pass, chasing the storm. I think right now, from the buzz, everyone assumes they're going to have a Gen AI strategy and a Gen AI plan. It's just so talked about. You feel like you're FOMO. You're going to be left behind if I'm not talking about it. And you have a lot of leaders in technology spending time figuring out how they're going to use this. I mean, there are people that not everyone has, and not every company has a Gen AI expert, someone in a head of AI that has these answers close to their fingertips. A lot of enterprises are hiring consulting companies, advisors. They're saying, hey, my head of data, my chief data person, go learn and see what this can do. There's a lot of discovery happening within technologists in enterprise. Is this a case where there might be a wait for the storm to pass and chase the storm? Or is this one of those things where, listen, this is gonna be big? We're 99.9, just chase it. How do you see that?
So let's rewind. When you mentioned about the metaverse in the previous question, that provides you the greatest contrast. When it comes to topics like metaverse or virtual reality or even blockchain, it's harder to connect the dots, and the change management and the outcomes are not as direct. With artificial intelligence, you have two distinct advantages. One, AI is not new. We have all seen the power of predictive side of AI. It is actually in deployment across industries. There's nothing new about it. What generative AI has done is it has just taken a step forward, and it has now made it possible for an actual creation side, generative side of artificial intelligence that didn't exist before. Now, to take advantage of this, there are distinct areas that you have to think of. First of all, from a strategic perspective, the organization has to think of, are we going after new markets? Are we talking about new revenue streams? Are we talking about making drastic improvement in the productivity of employees? Are we talking about, from a financial standpoint, showing distinct improvements on the bottom line? If that strategic aspect is understood, then the next part is the technological landscape. Where do we stand today? Do we carry a lot of tech and data obsolescence, or do we have the modern data ecosystems that will make it possible for us to harness the power of our existing data and then take advantage of the LLMs that are available off the shelf from all the big hyperscalers, and I can train them with my internal data and start creating new divisional use cases that will get us a sense of what kind of business outcomes are possible. Then comes the financial side. Do I have what it takes to invest significantly? Am I going to create my own LLM? Am I going to just take a more incremental approach? And then finally, am I investing in my talent so that people understand at individual business unit level what kind of business outcomes are now possible because they are thinking differently? And deploying Gen AI at scale requires you to think differently about the end-to-end outcome that you are currently providing, whether it is to your end consumer or end B2B customer or to another internal divisional buyer or a boundary partner, as many organizations call them. So the idea here is that in case of Gen AI, it is real, and the storm is more like a long drawn monsoon rain, if you would call it that way, or you can call it a long drawn period of sunshine that it's up to you. Do you take advantage of it, or you fundamentally believe that it's always rainy season and that this sunshine is only going to last for a couple of days and then I'll be back to a very rainy kind of a weather? So it depends on the analogy you want to use, but I think it is going to stay. And there, within a few years, you will see the leaders leaving the rest behind in terms of how they are taking advantage of AI to create absolutely new kinds of experiences for their clients and consumers and business partners.
I guess a couple things from that. One, I've been listening, and to get to scale, obviously there's some component of this that absolutely seems obvious and 100% chase the storm. All of this stuff makes sense. I do hear you had the Apple example, and I'm hearing about the importance of data. The cornerstone of all this will be data. It's not like data issues are new to enterprises. This is anybody who's invented data quality is not brand new. How do we reconcile the fact that we've had this data quality conversation for decades, and now it's so important that we're going to fix it? Like, to me, I'm almost a little bit of disconnect. I get it. As a former data person, I get the importance, but I'm also like, how has it been decades that we couldn't fix it, but we're going to fix it now? Like, I'm going to leave that. Maybe that's just the first question just to ask you.
Yes, no, I think it's a very relevant question. I mean, look, I remember my own data days back in the 90s when database administrators had to figure out the challenges of replication. You remember the company Golden Gate that came late 90s or early 2000s, and eventually Oracle acquired them. Their entire value proposition was built around the fact that you can trust that data will be replicated from one location to another in real time, and you can trust that if you are seeing an image on a certain location, it is the same data that exists elsewhere. Now, just think in the broad terms today, that challenge is now extending to security, reliability, availability, scalability, and most importantly, compliance. So if you are training models and you are feeding them data, and if your data that is being fed is not real time, or it is a stale copy with which it has been trained, or if it is, God forbid, if it is inaccurate, now all of a sudden you've got phenomenal problems. And all the market leading products that are out there for data lineage or for ensuring that your data pipelines that were established long time ago, some things are still flowing from data warehouses to data lakes, and now you might have established data fabric or data mesh in your environments. If all of that is not brought under one single unified view, some kind of a standardized view, then it is very hard to get a grip over the overall sanity of the situation. And if the challenge is not understood early on, then the repercussions will be much more significant, because then you would have invested in training the models only then to realize later on that your feedback loop is telling you something is fundamentally wrong. And then you deal with trust issues. Then you deal with the naysayers who say that, oh, this is yet another fad that's going to go away. And then you lose your competitive advantage because others might have taken the right approach first. So I think there is a significant opportunity. And to deploy GenAI at scale, organizations do have to move quickly, but they have to take the right steps first. The strategy has to be right. The investment in talent has to be right. Fixing the data pipeline, that has to be done properly. And most importantly, they have to pick the right kind of partners, whether it is product partners or consulting partners, or if they are doing it all in-house, they have to be very deliberate about those important decisions that they are taking as they go at scale.
We could talk about where you start, but that's an interesting conversation. But I think maybe what's even more interesting when we're talking about scale. So right now, models are going to evolve. Software companies are still deciding and figuring out how their Gen AI strategy is going to be played out. We can look at all the enterprise software companies. There's some form of Gen AI being developed, and they're all going to get better. If we just, and we can even look at cloud providers right now, right? Azure, AWS, GCP, they're all pretty good. Like, you can't say, oh my God, for your use case, one might be better than the other, but they all offer very similar functionality if you need to go to the cloud. If we assume models are going to get better and not that they're going to be commodity. Each company, each vendor is going to have their own secret sauce in their model. But then multiple companies at the enterprise level are going to implement these models. Where's the advantage going to come? Is it going to come back to data? The data you have, the quality of the data, the structure of your data, your data governance, your metadata? Because I keep coming back to that's going to be where, if we have Gen AI at scale, and we have different models maybe being deployed in different parts of the company, or whatever it's going to look like, I don't even know. How is one company going to be able to maybe take a competitive advantage over another?
I think it goes back to the steps that I was talking about earlier. If an organization thinks of this as yet another tool that has become available and they just have to take full advantage of it, then they are getting it wrong. They have to think fundamentally about their own business. What business are we in? What are we trying to do for our clients, or whether it's B2C or B2B? What is it that we provide? What value are we generating? And if we know that this is the value that we generate, can we create more complementary types of value? Can we offer deeper value than what we are doing today? And if we have to do that, are we positioned right? And what are the things that will help us achieve it? And as they dig deeper from a strategic standpoint, what they will discover is that whether it is the efficiency of creating that value, or it is the overall cycle time of bringing things to value, or it's the nature in which people experience that value, and finally, the efficiency with which that value is generated. Those parameters are analyzed, they will discover that generative AI and this entire revolution can make an impact in all of those areas. And the way it does it, there are some things which will become a handicap. It is practically impossible to create a competitive advantage if your data ecosystem remains fragmented, where one division is still running mainframes, the other one is in client server, the third one has got data lakes, and the fourth one is talking of data fabric. Then it is going to remain a challenge, you know, for a fact. Likewise, from a human perspective, if you're dealing with employees who are still stuck in the old ways and they have interest or desire to modernize or allow someone to challenge the way they handle their workflows, then from a people perspective, you have a huge problem. Similarly, from a finance perspective, if you're not willing to make upfront investments and get those business cases established on the longer term internal rate of return associated with the investments, if you're not willing to do that and you're simply waiting for this storm to pass, then you are only going to have the limited impact. You will throw small amounts of money in a few use cases here and there. You are basically doing window dressing, but not actually investing in foundational changes to your organization. So those are some of the important aspects of the willingness to create value on a sustained basis, and the right kind of value that keeps you ahead of the competition. That has to be the fundamental question why a company is thinking of AI at scale.
Last question. I know you got to get back to your day job, but everything you said absolutely connects, makes sense. If you're envisioning Gen AI at scale in an enterprise, and we have to re-envision the business model, we have to re-envision things that are happening, where does that come from? Right? Because on one hand, I'm kind of looking at that going, yes, the business leaders need to start thinking about how to take advantage of a solution, but it's a little bit of a black box solution in the sense that we're not really sure how it thinks. So we have to understand how to interact with it, and we have to change the way we approach asking a question. So I guess maybe, final question, and maybe it's a little bit, futuristic, but as you kind of see businesses needing to think AI first, Gen AI first, how do they start needing to reframe how they see the business? Because we're asking Gen AI to look for things that we may not be able to see. So if I knew what to look for, I probably would have known what to ask for, but I might not be able to do that.
Absolutely. And I think I will come back to my current organization, Genpact. We work with clients across different industries. And we do this for a living, where we advise clients, we help them modernize, we take over their operations, and our goal is always to generate the business outcome. So when AI and all these possibilities emerged, obviously clients came and started asking us those questions. So if you take the way we are engaging, we are helping them by setting up dedicated centers of excellence where all kinds of use cases are analyzed and business outcomes are forecasted. And then we are able to help them figure out what can go at scale, what can be maybe a nice hobby for a business unit, whereas things that actually have the legs. And so what it does is it gives the organization a chance to test the waters, to get a sense of what's the power of this, and also without having to invest a whole lot, get a sense that certain things can actually be done if we are going about it in a strategic way. And the reason why organizations listen to us is because internally, Genpact has declared itself to be an AI first company. So all the dog food that we are selling out there, we are eating it first internally. So our organization is being transformed from within so that we have a sense of the practicality of some of our recommendations.
I really appreciate your time, Brajesh. Great viewpoints. I think we're still early when we're talking about Gen AI at scale. I think a lot of what you said absolutely makes sense. I could see that these being the potential paths forward. It'll be awesome to see how this unfolds, and maybe we'll have you back in a little bit of time and talk about do postmortem. How did it really unfold? How close were we? I think it'll be really fun, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Sure. It has been a pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me, Amir.
Absolutely. I was just going to ask you before I let you go, if somebody wants to reach out to you to pick your brain on anything you said, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Just reach out to my email address, brajesh.jha@genpact.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure we include that in our show notes. And that's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think talking about Gen AI at scale is really interesting because I think the more we look at that scale, it's prompting us. Brajesh made some great comments about having that AI first mindset, data, taking advantage early. I mean, there's a lot of things there. And I think, this might be one of those tech, booms, phenomenons, whatever we want to call it, that waiting might not be an option, actually. So please share this with somebody else who might like this conversation. I'd appreciate that. And secondly, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is doing. I really would appreciate that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.